Well, that's good for me in Hawaii because all the Taiwanese will move to either California, Arizona, or Hawaii. So that's micro and macro. So let me give a definition of micro is you got your head up your ass. You better stand around and take a look at what's going on. Richard has been to our events and he's taught, and people always get blown away because they find out how micro they are. So my friend, you've been calling this for a long time. The dollar is in crisis, isn't it?
Well, so our economic system is in crisis, and I'm really worried now that we're on the verge of a serious economic crisis that could see the destruction of trillions of dollars of additional wealth before this thing is over.
Give me a break. Are we corrupt or what? Has it been corrupted?
Capitalism, in my view, became corrupted at the fundamental level when we stopped backing dollars with gold.
Yes.
And to make a long story short, this unleashed an explosion of credit. Credit absolutely exploded. Total credit or total debt in the United States grew from $1 trillion when I was 3 years old in 1964 to $91 trillion now. From $1 to $91 trillion in my lifetime. And during that process, that created a great deal of wealth, a great deal of economic growth in the United States and all around the world. But our economy became addicted to credit growth. Our economy must have credit growth to stay out of crisis. And now credit is contracting when you adjust it for inflation. So this is a very serious problem for our economic system, which I call creditism rather than capitalism, since it's driven by credit growth.
I want you to pull your head out of your butt and take a look at the world, because Richard sits in Thailand. He's an American. He sits out there and he can see the world, but Americans can't see past their house. Micro is this. You're pumping gas into your leased SUV and you're going, why is the price of oil going up? That's micro. I mean, they can't see it. But inflation, I'm afraid, is systemic now. And a lot of it is because what Richard's talking about is creditism. They just print so much money. Instead of solving the problems, they print money. And now it's going to backfire on everybody. Nord Stream 2, they torpedoed the pipeline. You have the war in the Ukraine. The English pound crashed. Japan's yen is in serious trouble. And I guess North Korea fired some rocket at the Japanese. You have inflation being systemic. And you have the BRICS. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. You want to take anyone on? First of all, what happened to the English pound? Because that's with the gilts and all that other stuff. Gilts is a government bond or something like that from England.
Right. That was the second blow we've experienced. What happened there was the new English Prime Minister and her finance minister announced very large tax cuts, very, very large tax cuts, with a lot of this going to the wealthy people, the wealthiest parts of society. And that meant that the UK government was going to have to borrow a great deal of additional money just at the time when the Bank of England, which had been buying government bonds through its quantitative easing program, it was planning to start selling government bonds. So suddenly, England looked like a third world country. Its interest rates on its government bonds doubled in about a 2-week period. They went from 2% on a 10-year government bond yield to 4%. Normally, that would make the currency appreciate, but the English pound started dropping like a rock. On Monday morning, it dropped to 103 to the dollar, the lowest in history. This huge swings in the currency, and more importantly, in the interest rates on the government bonds, was so violent and so unprecedented that the UK pension funds thought that they had cleverly hedged their positions with these derivatives contracts known as liability-driven investments. But the moves were so large that the people they had these derivative hedging positions with started calling in their margins. They couldn't put up their margins, so they got sold out of these hedging positions, and it looked like the entire UK pension system, the various pension funds, were on the brink of going bankrupt.
Collapse.
And so the Bank of England had to jump in, and they intended to start reversing quantitative easing. They were going to do quantitative tightening. But by the end of the week, they reversed course, announced they were going to do even more quantitative easing. They said they'd buy 65 billion pounds of additional government bonds over the next month or so. And that has restored calm temporarily. And in fact, it's injected a bit of euphoria in all the markets because investors hope that since the Bank of England reversed course and started loosening monetary policy, they hope the Fed is going to do the same thing.
The point here is this: what does it mean to the English people? Because their pensions were about to collapse. And the Bank of England is the Fed, the same as our Fed. When they start printing more money, what does that mean? Inflation, or are they trying to avoid a depression? What were they doing?
Well, the first move is to try to avoid a depression. That was what they had to do first. They had to act as a lender of last resort. No one else would provide money to support the financial system in England. Instead of England said, we'll do it. We'll create a bunch of money and we'll restore order. And they did.
That's been the problem since about 1998 when long-term capital management crashed and the Fed had to bail out a hedge fund. And Jim Rickards, his question was back then, who bails out the Fed? And I think we're kind of there now. Who's going to bail out the Bank of England? And who's going to bail out the Fed and all the Bank of Japan and all these central banks?
Well, the central banks have had it very easy for the last 3.5 decades because globalization was extremely deflationary. It was pushing down prices and the inflation rate was very low, so interest rates were very low. So they could get away with printing a whole lot of money without causing high rates of inflation. And by printing a lot of money, they would buy government bonds, and that would finance government spending. Let the government spend a lot of money and stimulate the economy that way. So this was Goldilocks for 3.5 decades. But suddenly now globalization is going at least partially into reverse. Yep. First, we had COVID and the supply chain bottlenecks all around the world. Next thing you know, Russia's invaded Ukraine, pushing up energy prices, oil prices, gas prices, wheat prices, corn prices, another big round of inflation. And suddenly the central banks are in shock because for the first time in 35 years, they have to deal with inflation. And inflation in the UK is at 10%. It's 10% in Germany. It's practically 10% in the United States. And so now, if they try to support the economy by printing more money, that's going to just fan the inflationary flames. But if they don't print more money, then credit's going to contract and the economy is going to spiral into crisis.
Because the English people still have no idea. Most Americans have no idea what happened. And they actually believe the Fed can save them. But as my friend Jim Rickards says, who's going to bail out the Fed? Who's going to bail out the Bank of England? The central bank system is under crisis also right now. And that's what Richard was alluding to 20-something years ago. And so the question is next is what's happening in China? I mean, they have the biggest bubble in real estate ever, right?
Absolutely. And well beyond real estate. They have excess capacity of everything on a mammoth scale. I once was told by a Chinese professor that in his town, the city government had built 2 beautiful big new bridges. The only thing is they hadn't built the river yet.
What's going to happen with the Japanese yen and why is North Korea firing rockets at them?
The Bank of Japan, the Japanese central bank, is determined to keep their interest rates at a very low level, even though interest rates in the United States and everywhere else, most other countries are going up very rapidly. Japanese interest rates are only 0.25%, and the Bank of Japan plans to keep them there. And they can do that, but that means no one's going to want to hold yen because you can't earn any money if the interest rate's 25 basis points. They want to sell their yen and buy dollars because the dollar you can get 3.5% interest. So that means the Japanese yen is falling. It's at a 20-year low. And unless the Bank of Japan changes its policy, it looks like it's going to keep falling.
I'm 4th generation Japanese American, and I always laugh about it because the Japanese per capita have the highest savings rate, demographically the highest savings rate of any population. And that's why the Japanese aren't the smartest. You know, I mean, why would you save money when the governments are printing it? So that's why in Rich Dad Poor Dad I put savers are losers. And now American savers are getting their butts handed to them because they're going to print even more. So the other thing too then is, what do you think about the BRICS? See, Americans can't see the BRICS. It's out of their picture. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the Belt and Road Project or the Silk Road Project. What do you think those guys are up to against the dollar?
They used to all be very strong and moving together so they could be grouped together under this heading of the BRICS. But now they're all moving in different directions for different reasons. Russia's economy is in serious trouble because of its ill-advised invasion of Ukraine, and it's not doing very well. They've got lots of sanctions imposed on them. They can't import any high-tech semiconductors, for instance, so they're going to run out of weapons. So their economy is in crisis. And of course, as you know, I believe that 20 years from now, oil's not going to have any value whatsoever. And their economy is entirely fueled by their earnings from oil and gas. So they're looking at a very dire future, in my opinion. China they had the biggest bubble in history since they have a totalitarian government that make the banks continue lending and continuing to invest. Their bubble will probably not collapse into any kind of Great Depression, but it's not at all inconceivable that they'll just stop growing the way Japan stopped growing 20 years ago.